Hello and welcome to the next iteration of the starter habitats for Planet Zoo console. Today I'm showcasing the completed set of the African grassland habitats. The African species in Planet Zoo are so numerous, I've split the workload for completing these into two parts. So this is part one for Africa, and for this I've focused on grasslands. Let's take a look what's new. First up is the Aardvark. This is a small habitat. The Aardvark doesn't need a lot of room. It's a little sparser than I'd like. The Aardvark doesn't tolerate a lot of plants in their environment. I wanted to make sure there was at least one tree in here to give it some depth, but obviously that doesn't help with it looking so bare because trees do take up a lot of the nature coverage allowance. That said, I'd much rather have less bushes and grasses in here to make room for that tree. The important thing is it is meeting the animal's requirements. There is also a one-way glass barrier in here to prevent stress. Room-wise, this can accommodate 3 aardvarks, so 2 adults and 1 baby, which is the maximum you'd be seeing in here anyway from breeding. Next up is a combined habitat I've created for the African buffalo and black wildebeest. That means if you use this with both species, you'll be getting a nice interspecies enrichment bonus from that. Space-wise, these animals do need a lot of room for grazing. I've been quite generous with the number of animals you can accommodate in here. Knowing the breeding patterns for both species, you will be seeing a lot of juveniles, so I've taken that into account to make sure there's room for that. Altogether, you can fit well over 50 animals in total for both species, so getting close to the maximum you'd want in here anyway. The buffalo does also have a requirement for a watering hole, so added one of those in the centre. Both species do use this though, so very nice seeing them both wading through the water there. Next is another big habitat for the African elephant. I will say this is an expensive habitat to place in game. There is actually quite a few of these new habitats. They are quite expensive to place, and that's purely because the animals need so much room. The bigger the habitat is, of course that's going to be more expensive because you're using more pieces to make the boundaries and stuff. What I'd say when that's the case, the animals themselves are quite costly to keep. So not really a species you'd be set up to place in a zoo until it was well established and cash flowing anyway. The elephants, I've certainly made sure there's plenty of room here, which I know that can be an issue with some blueprints. Some don't always account room-wise for more than a couple. This habitat, you can squeeze up to 7 adults and 6 juveniles in here. And believe me, I know it looks absolutely huge, but apparently elephants definitely need all that room. The elephants also have a water requirement, so I've made this into a feature. This is meant to represent a man-made pool, and I'd say this is the typical kind of wading pool you'd see in a real-life zoo. So I'm happy I managed to get this in and get it looking slightly realistic, at least the pool anyway. Since this habitat's so big, I tried hard to balance open space with built-up areas. In terms of foliage, elephants can't tolerate a lot of foliage, but I've counterbalanced that by how big it is. There's a lot of empty space at the back, which helps with adding more details up front, where guests will predominantly be viewing the elephants from. Next up, it's the African wild dog. I could have made this a bit smaller, but the wild dogs really do deserve to live in a big pack, so I widened this out a lot to accommodate for a big pack of around 23 adults. Breeding pattern for wild dogs is by alpha status, so there'll only ever be 1 breeding pair at any one time. I've accounted for that, so you can hold up to about 6 juveniles in this enclosure with the adults, and that's about the max. I think that's the maximum babies that a wild dog can have is 6 in a litter. For bears and dogs, I tend to favour making little nooks like this out of rocks for their sleeping quarters. This one I've made here wasn't quite large enough to fulfil their hard shelter needs, so we've got an additional building at the back of the habitat to take care of that. The dogs spend very little time back there, so it's not something you need to worry about with guests complaining about the view. If you do end up putting about 20 odd animals in here, there'll always be a fair few of them out and about around the front for viewing, so I wouldn't worry about some of them being in the back. Next up, we've got the cheetah. It honestly surprises me how little room the cheetahs need. I'd always assumed, like with the other big cats in Planet Zoo, they'd need a lot more space to roam, but this habitat, it is surprisingly compact, and would you believe it or not, this habitat is absolutely big enough for the maximum number of cheetahs that you would have in here, so I think that's 2 or 3 adults and up to 4 babies. I will say with this habitat I do like the style, but I did have some issues when I was building this with animal escapes. The cheetahs, like you'd expect, they do have a big clearance capability in terms of jumping. So there was certainly a bit of tweaking going on, moving the rocks around and changing the level of terrain right by the barriers. Just being careful to make sure I got rid of all of those escape points. Cheetahs are another shy species in Planet Zoo, so I've added the required one-way glass barrier to avoid them getting stressed. In terms of foliage, the cheetahs don't like a lot of coverage, so I've used up most of the nature allowance here with the drin grass. That's fast becoming one of my favourite foliage pieces in the game. Drin grass is great because it can give a lot of coverage, but it doesn't take much of the nature allowance up. Next is another combined habitat for the common ostrich and the common warthog. I've combined these two because they are great species to go together. Both the ostrich and the warthog are easy species to look after, so a great starter species. Certainly two species I used a lot in the early days when I started Planet Zoo. Building for the ostrich and the warthog. Another difficult customer, this one, because the ostrich is really picky with the plants and space. They need a lot of room, but they won't tolerate a lot of plants. So the worst combination there. I've used a little rockwork here there to help fill up the space and mitigate this a little bit, but still have to be careful with that because the ostrich is pretty good at finding escape points, so I did spend a little time making sure the rockwork at the back there, they can't climb up it and escape. Also worth pointing out, both ostriches and warthogs are keen breeders, so there's plenty of room for the numerous pregnancies and births that this habitat will see. Next habitat, oh boy, next habitat is the hippo. Hippos. Having created the habitats for every animal in Planet Zoo numerous times now, I think I can confidently say the hippo is one of the most difficult animals to create a habitat for in the whole game. That title did used to be reserved for the polar bear, but there's been some tweaks with the polar bear's requirements, so last time I created for the polar bear, it wasn't even that bad. Categorically cannot say the same for the hippo. It's been a nightmare. Hippos need a vast amount of space, both land and water. The land requirement and the water requirements are exactly the same, so I suppose that does make it a little easier when you're guesstimating. You just put in the same amount of water as you do land, and you just hope it's big enough. The hippos also struggle with the terrain. It has to be extremely flat or they refuse to go over it, so putting rockwork in here or plants even, they struggle to get over that, hence why it's predominantly flat in this habitat. That creates another problem of it looking a bit boring, so I've done what I can with this to try and make it look interesting, made it look a bit like wetlands. What I can't change or hide is simply how big it is. This is definitely huge, and believe it or not, this isn't even big enough for a full set of hippos. I couldn't justify going any bigger without the cost considerably exceeding what I deem appropriate to be called a starter habitat. I pushed this as far as I felt was reasonable for a moderately sized herd. You can fit around 16 adults in here and 15 juvenile hippos, so there is room for a decent sized group, just not the 29 adults and however many babies that were produced that the game says is the maximum. It would be taking up a quarter of the whole park if I did that. Next, I've got another combined habitat for the plain zebra and the reticulated giraffe. I love to compare what I did with my very first starter habitats way back when Planet Zoo released. The giraffe one I did for that, I thought that was pretty good, but compared to today's standards, yeah, it wasn't up to scratch. I'm much happier with this style of habitat for the giraffes I've got here. I think I've learnt so much about where to place plants, how to place rockwork, what to do with the buildings. Zebras aren't very fussy in the game, but the giraffes, well, obviously it's an interesting build to accommodate for their sheer size. The hard shelters, they're a lot taller than I would normally do for any other type of animal, but they need that room for clearance to get out the door. In terms of space, yes, the giraffes also need a lot of space. Zebras not so much, but giraffes, yep, they are space-hungry animals, definitely. I've accommodated for that, hence why this habitat is another one of the big ones here. For this, you can fit about 30 animals in here before they'll start complaining, so plenty of room for a good-sized herd and all the juveniles that will produce. Next habitat is the spotted hyena. I've based this one on the habitat that I created for the African wild dog, so very similar elements in here. Hyenas don't need quite as much room as the wild dogs though, so I've been able to reduce this down a little in size. You can fit a full set of adults and the anticipated juveniles that'll produce comfortably in this space. Like with the wild dogs, the sleeping cave area in here isn't quite big enough to fulfill their hard shelter needs, so there is another building at the back. And like with the wild dogs, they don't spend a lot of time back there though, so I don't see that being a problem with guest viewing. It's another combined habitat next, this time for the Thomson's Gazelle and the Sable Antelope. These animals are strikingly similar in size, shape and how they look. I had a hard time figuring out which was which as I was building this habitat. So yeah, it feels like it's a perfect fit for them to live alongside each other in this habitat. Both of these species are keen breeders and they're a social animal, so prefer to live in large groups, hence why this habitat is yet another pretty big one. Also, I can't remember if it was the gazelle or the antelope. May have been both, but definitely at least one of these animals is shy towards humans. So again, I've made sure there's a one-way glass barrier at the front here to avoid them getting stressed. Next habitat. I was looking forward to working on this one. It's the West African lion. Compared to where I started out building habitats for the West African lion many years ago, I've really come a long way with this one, and I feel like I've perfected the design for the lions. Gone with another rock formation sleeping shelter, but with a different take on this one. I've used a metal roof piece to replicate the kind of hide structures you might see for species like lions in real zoos. Realistically, these hides in real life have grass or wooden roofs, but the minimum terrain the game allows for this is far too thick to have the landscape as the roof here. It would just look silly, and using base game pieces only, there wasn't anything I could use to cover this manually, so instead I've gone with the metal roof piece, and I still think it looks okay. I've spent ages just watching the lions roam around this habitat. I do somewhat agree with what other community members say, where the lions need a bit of development. They are looking a bit fuzzy, aren't they? Especially compared to some of the DLC animals that clearly has a lot of work put into them. But even putting that aside, the lions are just so fun to just watch. They do get up to all kinds of mischief in here. I've even seen them stand and sit on the shelter roofs at the front, then they'll do a giant leap down onto the ground. Should certainly be a great view for the guests. Size-wise, the lions do like to also be in a big pack, and the male lion will mate with all of the females, so definitely took that into account when considering how big this should be. You can fit around 30 adults in here, and believe it or not, you could have up to 60 juveniles in here to account for that. That's all of the Africa Grassland base game starter habitats now completed for console. A lot of challenges with this set in terms of sheer space and fussy plant requirements, but it does feel good to tackle Africa finally. I'd been leaving the African animals to last for a reason. They are fussy customers when it comes to making their habitats. Anyway, I hope you like how all these habitats have come out. They are all now available on the Frontier Workshop. Next episode, we'll be finishing off the starter habitats for console completely, so I hope to see you there for that one. Thanks for watching, I'll catch you in the next video.